This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review, and what I'm looking at today is 2021's Werewolves Within, directed by Josh Rubin. And my expectations for this movie were really high because werewolves, which is my favorite movie monster. And Werewolves Within, it's okay. It's not great, and one of the better representatives of the werewolf genre by any stretch of the imagination. It is interesting though, it's very well acted and it's very funny. But the thing is, I perhaps think it's too funny because there's never any real sense of menace or threat about the movie. And that's not to say it's not very well done, because it is. But, as I said, I think it's too funny. The movie is based on a video game, which I had never heard of before this time, which is also not a surprise because I'm not really a video game person, and stars Sam Richardson as a ranger, a newly appointed ranger in the town of Beaverfield. And Beaverfield is filled with a lot of quirky residents. Too quirky, by my reckoning. And while that may work for a sitcom, because numerous sitcoms do revolve around that formula, for a movie it just comes off as very shallow. What came to mind, by the way, when I was thinking of a television show that does this, is Cheers, or Seinfeld, or numerous other shows. But those are television shows, and you have time to develop character, and they eventually develop depth. With a 2-hour movie, you don't have that. And it's not 2 hours, by the way. I want to say an hour and a half, if that. So, the characters are very quirky, but they're just too quirky. The movie, as I mentioned earlier, revolves around this ranger, newly appointed, arriving in the town of Beaverfield. And the movie establishes early on, literally after this great quote, and it's probably the funniest thing in the movie. Though, the movie establishes that someone has been killed. And just after that, a new ranger arrives. And people come to the conclusion, eventually, that it's a werewolf that's doing the killing. And so, people begin to panic. And this is where we see even more quirkiness come to the fore. And I don't mind quirky characters in a movie by any stretch. But, as I said, these aren't people. They're characteristics. They're characteristics that walk around. So, it's just not very satisfying. The movie is also structured like an Agatha Christie story, which is to say, of how many people are gathered, one of them is the killer. Which is, again, interesting, and very much in the vein of movies like Knives Out and Glass Onion. Though, when you learn who the killer is, it is probably not someone you would suspect as being a killer, because the narrative doesn't give you clues that it should. And not to give away who the killer / werewolf is, they're the only person other than the ranger who haven't been in the position they're in for a long period of time. But you won't know that because the movie won't tell you that. There's one character who you'll learn later had not been in that post particularly long. But the movie doesn't give you the clues, namely telling you at some point that character had not been in that position long. Because if they did, you'd probably suspect them right off the bat. This, for me, is less an example of writers cheating than just the narrative not being terribly fleshed out. Because it's just such a fun movie in a lot of ways. It's just very weightless. And it shouldn't be as weightless as it is. Part of it is due to, as I said earlier, there are no characters in this movie. They're just quirks with names. And I wish it had more of an impact than it actually did. Werewolves Within, once again not having played the video game, takes its plot from movies like 1974's The Beast Must Die, which revolved around a gathering of people and one of them having to be a werewolf. It's an interesting idea, though I think Werewolves Within would have been a much better movie if it would have taken the idea more seriously. Less jokes, more drama, more violence equals better movie by my reckoning. But that's just not the movie Werewolves Within is. It's certainly watchable, it's fun, it's on iTunes for 99 cents, but it's just not great. If you've seen The Howling, if you've seen Wolfen, which is not a werewolf movie per se, it's more of a cryptid movie, but it is related. If you've seen An American Werewolf in London, which for my reckoning is probably one of the weaker werewolf movies. Great transformation, weak movie. That being said, it's worth watching, but nothing to get excited about. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow. Peace. And have a great Monday.